In an upcoming series I'll be working on this to restore and repair it. It is of course a PDP-8M, but this series is not about this machine. It's about the reason these types of machines came into existence. So I'll get this off the bench and I'll replace it with an example of the sort of equipment this machine came into existence because of. Okay, so this is the type of equipment I'm talking about. It is of course a calculator. So over 100 years ago now, well over 100 years ago, there was a need for many calculations to be carried out, and they were mostly done by people whose profession was a calculator. It used to be a job rather than a device, and they sat there all day working out, initially with paper and pencil, calculations for various tables, and there was quite a lot of need for it as science developed and money came around, and the need to keep track of money came around, and banking developed. So the calculator came into existence. That, along with other requirements, prompted the need for things such as computers, which is an example of one I've just shown you. And this is not the piece of equipment this series is about, but this is the modern equivalent. And this is a modern calculator, of course. So this is a TI Inspire CX, and this has all the bells and whistles that you'd expect from a modern calculator. Keeps track of units. You can have numbers with hundreds of digits. This has got thousands of functions built in, true full color graphing display, that sort of thing. And this came out in 2019, so it's quite a modern design. But if we go back just a few years, then what we end up with is one of these. So this is not really programmable in the same way. It is multi-line display. It's got a lot of functions built in. And this particular device was released in 2013, so it's a good sort of 6 years older than the one I've just shown you, and you can see the amount of development that's gone on. Now the calculators I'm showing here are not the only examples, and there are other examples of similar types of devices. Some are better, some are worse. There was a lot of overlap, and I'm not really comparing like for like all the way through. I'm just giving examples here of the type of equipment that was available. And so there was this device in 2013. If we go back just a few years to a slightly older equivalent, we end up with this one. So this was released in 2008. Again, multi-line, semi-programmable in as much as you can enter fairly lengthy formulas into it. It's got memory, you can store the formulas, that sort of thing, but it's still fundamentally the same type of device. And if we go back still further, then we end up with something like this. So this is more of a true programmable calculator. So this is a 2001 vintage, and it could do graphing. It does allow the entering of full programs, and is coming up for nearly 20 years old. So these have been around for a while, but they have developed a huge amount in the last 20 years. If we go back from 2001 to 1977, we end up with something that looks more like this. This was described as an executive calculator. Really only did the 4 major functions and a few other little bits and pieces. Very useful at the time, but we can see how much calculators developed in a little over 20 years. And in fact, in just a few years after this was released, we had calculators that could do far more, of course. But that's the sort of device that prompted the need for computers. It was doing the 4 basic functions of add, subtract, multiply and divide, and that's really what this did. So if we go back still further from this, we end up with something a bit bulkier than this. And this is of course the HP 9830A. You've seen me restore this device in previous videos, and I'm happy to say it still works quite some time later. And this device, although it's 30 years older than this, it really does the same thing. It can't do graphing directly, but it does have add-ons that allow the plotting of graphs. So very similar sort of function to this, and so the HP was really way ahead of its time. A very capable machine, just very bulky because of the nature of the electronics of the time. Now when we go back beyond this, any further back, then really calculators started to merge into the mechanical world, where they were mechanical adding machines rather than the electronic devices that followed on. So a good example of that is of course the STW10. So this is the STW10. As you can see, it's quite a big machine, and again you saw me repair and restore this in a previous series of videos. This machine effectively was the same as this. It fulfilled the same basic functions. It did the four basics. It added, subtracted, divided and multiplied. This is actually a far more capable machine than this. This has got 20 digits. You can do multiple operations at the same time. It's motorized, so it is automatic, but it is mechanical. And if you did see the series of this, you'll know it's an extremely complicated machine. Very interesting. And if we go back further again, this was released initially in around 1949, so it's quite an old machine, and about 20 years before this. So we're looking at about 20 years development between this machine and this one. If we go back still further from the Freuden, then what we end up with is something like this. And this is a MADAS, or MADAS, depending on how you want to say it, calculator. These were originally manufactured, not this particular model, but something very close to this particular model was initially released in the 1890s. And I believe this model was originally released around 1910. So a very old design, well over 100 years old, but fulfilled again a similar function to this. Still more capable, it does more digits. It's kind of semi-automated. This is the motorized version. So you still had to do a lot of the operations manually, and you had to know how to use these to get anything out of them. But this is what this series will be about. It's going to be not a full restoration, it's more a repair and tidy up. This particular machine, while it may look quite tatty, is actually in very good condition. Normally all the paint is worn off the front of these. We have got wear around the sliders, and a couple of dings and dents on the back. There are some parts missing. The owner did source a new switch for this, but there are parts missing down in the manual drive part, and it is locked up. The slide won't move, and I suspect it's part way through a calculation, which is why it won't move. So I've had a quick look at this, and a few of the digits move, but most of them are locked up, so I suspect it's halfway through a calculation. That's the kind of thing that happens with these when some of the addition gears are partly engaged. So it is motorized and the hand crank's missing, but we can actually turn it manually down here. But I won't do that now. I want to see what's going on inside before I start turning any of the wheels. I don't want to damage anything inside if it's not already damaged. There are quite a few bits missing that we'll either have to fabricate or find some alternative for. Certain parts do seem to be working and do work quite nicely. They feel quite nice. This whole thing is solid brass, so these front plates are, I think, 1/8 inch thick solid brass plates, which is why these last so well. But in the following videos in this series, I'll strip this down. We'll have a look inside, see how it works, hopefully get it working and cleaned up, see if we can get the motor drive working, and try and find some solutions for the parts that are missing. Any comments are welcome. If you have one of these and or you've restored one, then please let me know.